For the past several weeks in the Jesus Way series, we've been walking closely with the disciples of Jesus. And if we are honest, we'll probably see ourselves in some of those disciples' lives. You agree? We are not much different. We stood with these disciples when Jesus asked this piercing question that Pastor Dale 2 weeks ago led us into think, who do you say I am? That question is not just a theological question, it's a very personal question. It reveals what we truly believe, who Jesus is in our lives. Then last week we heard Jesus say something even more harder. If you want to follow me, take up your cross. Elder Mike talked about what that means. We were reminded that following Jesus isn't just about receiving Him as Lord, or it is not about adding Jesus into our plans, but it's about surrendering our plans to Jesus. It's about laying down the control that we keep, the pride and the expectations, and even our own understanding of how God should work in our life. And that's where those disciples were. They were living in the tension. They confessed on one side Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, who is yet to come, but they are also confused by listening to Jesus when He talked about the cross, the suffering. They love Him, but they don't fully understand Him. They are devoted, but they still listening to their own assumptions about the glory and what it should look like. That's where we are too in our lives. We know who Jesus is. We have declared our faith in Him. But when His way doesn't match our expectations, when obedience becomes too costly, when the future feels unclear, the question is, whose voice do we want to listen to? When things do not go the way we want it, whose voice are we listening to? Well, today we're going to go up with the disciples again to a mountain where Peter, James, and John was taken by Jesus. It's another moment of glory, a moment of revelation, a moment when heaven breaks open, and in the middle of their awe, their fear, and even Peter's well-meaning confusion, they heard the Father speak. Not a long sermon. Well, Jesus did that at the beginning of His journey, a sermon on the mount. This time, the Father speaks only one word, a clear command. And that says, listen to Him. Listen to Him. Let's turn our attention to Mark chapter 9. We're going to read verses 2 to 8. If you would like to stand with me and read this passage together. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with Him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There He was transfigured before them, His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them. And a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. Please be seated. Up until this point, the disciples are watching Jesus, his miracles, his authority, and his power. In Mark chapter 8, verse 27, we looked at that 2 weeks ago. Jesus turns to his disciples and asks this question, "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered that saying, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." That was a revelation moment for not only for Peter, but for all the disciples. That's the first time they recognized that Jesus is the Messiah that all the prophets and the Torah, the law was talking about. Their veils were lifted up. They were like so shocked by this revelation, including Jesus telling, "Simon, this is a revelation moment. This is not from you. My Father in heaven has revealed it to you." But immediately after that revelation, all 3 Gospels say something beautiful. It says, from that moment onward, Jesus started talking about his death. Jesus began to reveal that he is going to go through suffering, rejection, death, and finally, resurrection. The Messiah will go to a cross. Well, Peter, who just had the divine insight, now pulled Jesus aside and started rebuking Jesus because it didn't fit into his understanding that I had this revelation, this is the Son of God, this is the Messiah, but he is talking something nonsense now. He's going to go to death? What kind of Messiah is going to suffer and die? It didn't fit into his understanding. So he started rebuking Jesus. And Jesus pulled him aside and told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have the things of God in your mind." What is coming right now from your mind is not the revelation. It is your own information. You are speaking from your mind. In one single chapter, you see Peter moving from revelation to resistance. Well, after 6 days of this event, so this is in the same weekend, so if it's first one happened on a Monday, that weekend, Jesus decided to take his disciples on a mountain, particularly Peter, James, and John. After Peter having this revelation, confusion, and rebuke, and Jesus talking to Peter about all that happened, he said, "Let's go up into the mountain." If you read all 3 Gospels, you will see as they were up there in the mountain, Jesus was praying. In the scripture, when you read, mountains are usually places of revelation. That is where Moses walked up and had his revelation of God's presence. That is where Elijah had his revelation of who God is. And now you see these 2 giants of the faith of the Old Testament, Moses, who represent the law, the Torah, and Elijah, one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament, who represent all the prophets, come up on the mountain to talk to Jesus. It's a very beautiful moment. You can see the prophets and the law is represented up in this new mountain where Jesus have his transfiguration. His divine glory shines through. Moses and Elijah appear. Again, who speaks? Peter. Peter speaks. Mark writes about that in a parenthesis. He did not know what he was talking. He did not know what he was talking. It's so honest. It's so human that when we go through that kind of moment, and then the cloud overshadows them, the same kind of divine presence that filled the tabernacle in the wilderness. A cloud appears, and the Father speaks this time. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. There are a few observations from that passage I want to share with you this afternoon and bring in a couple of applications as I close this sermon. Number one is revelation does not automatically produce alignment with the will of God. Just because we have a revelation, that does not mean we will align with God's plan. Revelation does not eliminate confusion. Peter had the revelation in chapter 8, but still misunderstood the way of Jesus. On the mountain, he sees the glory, and immediately he wants to build tents. Why? Why does he want to do that? Because glory makes more sense than suffering. Glory makes more sense than suffering because in his mind, he is still caught with his idea. We don't want to leave this place. Jesus, this looks amazing. We don't want to leave the glory moment. He wants to freeze that moment. He wants to stay in the supernatural. He wants to manage the moment. But following Jesus is not about managing spiritual experience. I grew up with spiritual experiences, and I cherish those moments. And I wish honestly, just like Peter, that it was better to be there. Because the moments of glory are something that we will all want to cherish and to stay. But the Father says, yes, it is important to have those experiences. But are we willing to listen to the Son of God when he speaks? Especially when he speaks about suffering. He speaks about waiting or surrender. In fact, we can see Peter later in his life, he denies knowing Jesus. He had the revelation, he saw the glory, he heard the Father speak, he saw the miracles, he did the miracles, yet he denied knowing Jesus. That's why I say revelation does not automatically produce alignment with God's plan. Just because you and I have a spiritual experience, that does not automatically put us into obedience to what God wants to do. It takes a listening ear. It takes disciplining ourselves to keep on listening to the voice of God. We can't live our daily life in obedience to God if we choose that, okay, I had once upon a time a revelation moment. That will take care of everything. It won't. We need to keep on listening to Jesus. The question I want to ask is this: where might we be trying to shape God's plan to fit our expectations rather than aligning ourselves to His plans? Think about it for a moment. Where am I trying to control everything? Where am I trying to take charge of my life, my plans, and my decision, and say, God, you fit into my plan, rather than telling God, God, I want to fit into your plans, even when I don't understand, even when I don't get the final outcome. Remember a few weeks ago I spoke about it, that God does not give us a complete plan at the beginning. It's not the road map that He gives. He gives us a compass so that we are focused on Him and continue our journey. Second observation from the passage is this: the Father repositions us from speaking to listening. God repositions us from speaking to listening. Not that speaking is not needed, but we need to know when to speak and when to listen. Peter speaks because silence is uncomfortable. Have you ever felt that? The silence is so uncomfortable, so you want to make some noise. So we do some things like this. We fill silence with opinions. We fill silence with confusion and assumptions. We fill with uncertainty, with our own voices. Earlier in Mark chapter 8, Peter corrected Jesus. This did not happen to you. He was speaking again. In chapter 9, he is still speaking. He interrupts. Both times, heaven interrupts Peter. First, Jesus said, "Get behind me. Have your thoughts aligned with Father's will." Now, the second time when he interrupts, Father interrupts him and says, "Peter, listen to him. This is my son." And if you read those passages in other Gospels, like Luke's Gospel, Luke says what the conversation between Jesus and the prophet Moses and Elijah. Mark doesn't mention that, but Luke mentions that. Do you know what they were talking about? Have you ever read the passage in other Gospels? What was this? The law representative and the prophet representative speaking to Jesus. Well, they were talking about Jesus' cross, the death. That's what mentioned. They were talking about Jesus' departure. In fact, the word that is used is the same word as Exodus. Very famous word for Moses, right? He was talking about his departure, his time to leave this world. The law and the prophets are pointing towards this one son. It's a beautiful joining of the law and the prophets, pointing their fingers to saying that this is the son. There is a shift happening in Peter's posture at that moment. Being corrected by Jesus to follow him and carrying the cross. From setting his mind on earthly expectations to listening for heavenly directions. The Father does not give an explanation about suffering, why it has to be. He does not answer every question. He gives one command: listen. Spiritual maturity is not about knowing more, but it is about positioning ourselves to hear and obey. Oftentimes we think the spiritual maturity, walking with Jesus, is knowing more scriptures, knowing more theology. That is not what spiritual maturity is. Spiritual maturity is a willingness to listen and to put it into practice what we hear. That is where we grow into maturity. The Father speaks into the silence there. When Peter doesn't know what he was trying to do. In fact, Luke says that they were so sleepy, and when Jesus wakes them up, they see this all. Now you can imagine that these guys were so sleepy, and Jesus goes and bats, and then they see these three people, and Peter doesn't know what to do. He said, okay, let me make one tent for you, one tent for you. Disciples have no understanding at that point. Peter kept speaking instead of listening. The cross and the suffering has been announced. Glory could be misinterpreted. Lo, and the prophets are present. And the confusion is rising. In the middle of that, the Father speaks to correct their misunderstanding, to establish the authority of who Jesus is. They heard, this is my son. The identity has already been revealed. Now through this, listening to Jesus, the Father is telling he is not only he is the Son, but he has the authority, and you must listen to him. He is clarifying the mission of Jesus. He is repositioning the disciples by speaking. And finally, they come to this place. And I want to ask this second question to all of us. When we are in a place, in a noisy world, listening is not an easy thing. It's almost like a warfare. Listening requires slowing down. Listening often requires surrender. And listening requires trust. By the way, when God the Father speaks, he doesn't say, consult him or consider him. What does he say? Listen to him. When you study that word, listen to him, in its original language, it actually means keep on listening to him. It's a present continuous tense. Keep on listening to Jesus. When we are uncertain in our journey, which voice do we tend to trust most? When path is unclear and uncertain ahead of us. As I was preparing this sermon this whole week, I talked to my wife about some of these things. And she was sharing with me that the challenge for most of us is not that we don't want to listen, but we don't hear. Anybody in that group? I can see some hands going up. We don't hear because oftentimes we don't hear because our hearts and our minds are already cluttered with other voices. We are listening all the time from the culture around us, from the social media around us. Somebody is already speaking into us. The final scene of that, as they wake up, they hear this sound, they only see Jesus. Moses fades, Elijah fades, the cloud lifts, but Jesus remains. Isn't that a powerful, powerful explanation? The law and the prophets who came on the mountain points to this one person. He is the one who fulfills everything. He is not one voice among the many voices. He is the final word. When the experience ends, when the emotions fades, Jesus remains there. And he doesn't say, let's stay here in the glory moment. He says, let's go down. Let's go to the valley. That is where your life will be tested. It's amazing to be up in the mountain, that glory moment. But our life is going to be lived out daily in the valley. The voice on the mountain is a preparation for us to be in the valley. Let me wrap this up. The three things I shared with you is this: revelation does not always eliminate confusion. And the Father's voice speaks to realign, reposition us to listening posture. And when everything else fades, Jesus remains. I want to bring three applications quickly as we leave this evening service. Number one, create space to listen. Peter spoke because silence is uncomfortable. Listening requires intentional space. This week, as we began our 40 days of Lent reading, we started this Wednesday. I sent emails to you this last week. If you are not signed up for our mailing list, please go to our website and sign up for the mailing list. You will receive all the emails and the e-newses that we send out weekly. Set aside 10 to 15 minutes daily with no agenda except to listen. Read a short gospel passage. It's 5 to 6 verses. Please take time to meditate. Ask Jesus, what are you saying to me? Resist the urge to rush, not for information. Maybe no more podcasts for a few days. Not more noises around, no, but just creating a space. Make room for Jesus. If the Father says, listen to him, then we must create a room where we can listen to God. Create a space. Number two, obey what you already know. Often we want new revelation, but we haven't obeyed the last instruction that Jesus gave. Jesus spoke to his disciples about humility, forgiveness, and surrender. Think about what is one clear teaching that Jesus gave you and you are not following, you are not obeying. Maybe to forgive someone, to reconcile with somebody, or serve quietly, or let go of control. Speak the truth graciously. Listening is proven by obedience. Listening is not proven by emotional stir-up. Listening is proven when we decide to obey. And thirdly, take time to silence other competing voices this week. A father is not speaking and saying, add Jesus to your conversations. He's saying, listen to him. As I said earlier, often it is difficult when our ears are bombarded with the noises that comes to us from our fears, from cultural pressures, from social media, or maybe from our career ambitions, or maybe from comforts. Intentionally take time to limit other noises. Maybe fast from certain media things. Pause before major decisions that you take and pray first. Ask Jesus, does this align with your way? The mountain experience was a momentary thing. The command to listen is ongoing. The Father is still speaking the same word. Listen to him. Will you make a room for him to listen? Please stand with the team as we prayerfully sing this song, I will make room for you.